on video in just a moment, but glad you've joined us tonight, and I'm looking forward to the conversation we're going to have. It should be a fun topic.
Yes, it should. Hey, man. Hey, Steve. Good to see you in the chat. Hope everything is well. Yes, episode 99. Next week we got 100 for both Greyhawk Awakenings and Loremaster's Arcanum. Do. It's good to see you. Joff, good to see you. Joffrey. Yeah, John had to go upstairs for a moment. He just got back down, and we will be going fully live shortly.
Okay, all right, back. Got the cool stuff I wanted to show. And let's go live on video in 3, 2, and 1. All right, welcome everyone to Blue Box Loremaster's Arcanum. This is episode 99 tonight, and very excited to have Robert with me, my co-host, who is ever mistaken. We have the ever mysterious Tim, and we have the ever mistaken Rob. And so, Rob, good to have you with us tonight, as always, my friend.
Good to be here, John.
Hey, everyone, thanks for joining us. We're going to have a fun conversation. It's going to be a quick 1-hour LMA. Obviously, last week, we had the big 2-hour LMA with Richard Baker, and we actually will talk a little bit about Richard tonight, but in the context of our conversation. And we're talking about perception in the game of D&D, and I got a little bit cheeky and called this D&D LASIK, fixing perception. And yes, I actually did have LASIK surgery about 25 years ago, and it did fix my perception, at least my visual perception. My wife still thinks many of my perceptions are not very good. But it's going to be fun talk tonight, and we're going to look at a lot of materials. Rob, I spent some time gathering some of the materials I think it would be fun for us to talk through. And we're going to look at each of the editions and how it evolved. I've got a really neat Dragon Magazine article that we're going to look at tonight, and also Richard's discussion on this topic on his blog post, which is what, in combination with my own issues with how I was running perception, or the effect of perception, investigation, the search skills, they've evolved through the years, and I'm just not really happy with where it is in my current game, in Pathfinder and in 3.5. So Rob, you and I have talked about it a little bit. I'm going to get a couple things here that I want to show, but why don't you kind of just give us some opening remarks on this topic as we get ready to dive in?
So, for those of you who have played enough of 5e or any of the earlier editions, which would be, I guess, 4E, and what did we determine was just Pathfinder, starting with Pathfinder 1?
Yeah, I mean, that's where you really saw perception. Although, interestingly enough, you're going to see this Dragon Mag article from 133 that's crazy fun from 88, but yes.
Oh boy. Yeah. So I can tell you from a 5e perspective, I mean, perception has become, it's become like the Uber skill. It's the thing that, you're almost doing it. It almost feels like you're doing it wrong if you're not taking it, because it's so relied upon. And I think one of the things we want to discuss is whether it's being relied upon too much and in some cases inappropriately.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And yeah, Steve, we're going to talk about that tonight, and we're going to do some polling. I mentioned this in my Discord. This is not purely an academic exercise. Hey, Tom, tonight we're actually going to discuss some modifications that I anticipate I will implement in my rule set. As you know, I run essentially the PF1E or 3.5 system in my game. I do have some modifications, but they're fairly isolated. So one of the modifications is that I include certain classes from 1E and 2E. I love the uniqueness of things like the 1E Cavalier or the 1E Barbarian, which give these classes less of a nerfed and more of a unique flavor. I also, of course, have custom crit tables. I use both the Ever Mysterious Tim and the Bloodwild SW Steve crit tables. Steve has much better fumble tables and also spell crit tables than Tim has. But those two things make for a lot of fun. I use the group initiative system from 1E2E because I think it keeps the game moving more quickly, and we'll probably talk about that on another LMA again. But my core is PF 1E or 3.5 D&D. And it does, I found, have an unbalancing effect. Perception is used more than any other skill in the game. It comes up in so many circumstances, whether you're skulking around a city, whether you're moving your way through a dark forest, or whether you're on the field of combat, whether you're having a conversation. It's kind of become the catch-all, and we're going to see why that's happened. So I already felt uncomfortable. Hello, Anna. Hey, William, good to see you as well. I already felt uncomfortable with the way it was kind of happening in my game. And then when I read Richard Baker's blog post in preparation for him attending last week, it really struck a nerve with me and made me feel like this was a topic for us to discuss. So before we jump into that, I want to remind you next week will be our 100th episode of Loremaster's Arcanum. And in celebration of that, next Wednesday night, we'll be giving away this gorgeous guy. This is Dragon Magazine number 100. And it is super cool, very pretty. Also includes the embossing on the cover. This is wrapped. It is absolutely mint condition, pristine. This is not a reprint. This is an original of Dragon Magazine 100, and we're going to give this away next Wednesday night for our 100th episode of Loremaster's Arcanum. And then, as I also mentioned repeatedly over the past week, a couple of weeks actually, Tuesday nights, a Greyhawk Awakening session, we'll be giving away, that'll be our 100th GHA, we'll be giving away the Glossography 1982 box set of the World of Greyhawk. This will be a gift giveaway on Tuesday night and our 100th episode of Loremaster's Arcanum. And so hope you guys can enjoy that. Jay, thanks for popping in. I know you're all the way in Texas. Hope things are going well for you. Okay, so let's go to this, and this is from Richard's site. And Rob, I'm going to read this, and we'll kind of kick off the conversation. And I won't read it verbatim, but here, let me turn down the music just a bit. I don't know if it's in your ears hot, but it's hot in my ears. Okay, so I'm going to go to reader mode, so it's easier for you guys to see online. And the gist of it is, he's actually saying, this is from earlier in spring, that he wanted to fix the perception skill. Now, remember, this is a guy who has written so much of the D&D rule set. We talked last week about even his influence on the creation of the sorcerer class. He is responsible for Smite Evil. He's responsible for Barbarian Rage. Did so much for the game, and he's kind of looking at where the game has gone and feels like perception is broken. And what he points out here is, one, wise characters are naturally the best spotters in the game, even when they shouldn't be. I think this is a key point. You saw, whoops, I'm not showing the right view here, so let me go to, that's what you guys should be seeing. You really saw this in the 3.0 and above, and it has continued to 5e, where things like perception got married to wisdom. And it makes sense in certain contexts. So let's start there. The marriage of perception to wisdom. I'm going to quickly walk through. We're going to come back to these, Robert. But this is what you had in 2e. In 2e, you didn't have skills per se, you had non-weapon proficiencies. And these non-weapon proficiencies played the same role that many of the skills that we have in the later editions played. So you would see, for example, the closest thing that you would have to perception in this skill set would be alertness, which was also based on wisdom, and it was unique to the Ranger class. It was in the Ranger's Handbook, the Complete Ranger's Handbook, page number 82. But you can see all the non-weapon proficiencies here. You did have diplomacy related to charisma, so that would kind of carry forward. You had, a ton of different non-weapon proficiencies that were carried across all of these different systems and these different books. When you then got to 3.0 and 3.5, this is what you had in D&D 3.5. So you can see here, now we have no perception in 3.5, but we do have spot. We also have search. And these are interesting. So if you look at the spot skill here is, detecting where characters are hidden. Sorry, I've got an ad popping up here. Where characters are hidden. And obviously you can't see invisible creatures, but you can read lips, yada, yada. And so I don't even know how to get rid of that, so I'm going to go back to the previous page. And then you had, as I mentioned before, the search skill. Then when you went to Pathfinder 1E had perception now for the first time actually codified in the rule set systems that we're seeing today. So perception, now you see spot is gone. And you also see, interestingly, search is gone. So you had a unified skill here in Pathfinder, which really made perception a catch-all for many of the things that happen in the game. And, the camera views. I'm sorry, I forgot to fix on this screen. Thank you very much for yelling at me, Amanda. This will just take a quick second. Whoops, wrong one. These views weren't set up. I forgot when I had done my new overlays. This is the first time since the new overlays were implemented that it's only been Robert and I haven't had a guest, and I had not updated the two-person view. So thank you very much for pointing that out, Amanda. Let's just take 1 second. And this guy too. Robert, that's a gorgeous looking background.
It is.
For a gorgeous looking man. There we go. All right, so let me zoom in so you can see these a little bit better. So here are the skills in Pathfinder. And of course, this is the first time that we really see perception. And perception as a skill is linked to wisdom. So let's pause there. This is the first note that Richard is making about the perception skill that we see all the way through 5e. Up through 5e today, perception is the skill. You do have some other skills which separate it, which I want to talk about. But the perception skill is based on wisdom. Robert, you and I talked about this a little bit. Give me your thoughts on that. Where does it work and where does it break?
So, I mean, where it works, and I should probably state, it's kind of weird because for me, I have more problems with where it's used or when it's used as opposed to what it's good for. I get the concept of being able to perceive things, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. I like the idea of wisdom because for me, wisdom is those learned experiences. It's you can sense that something is not right because you've seen this thing before, this area, or when something just doesn't appear quite right. I like that feel to it. With me, the bigger problem has been one. Sometimes it gets used instead of other skills that should be. Like in 5e, I've noticed that some dungeon masters end up using perception when they're talking about dealing with another person, where it should be an insight skill. And it's kind of the perception is your situational awareness versus insight, which is dealing with another person and being able to interpret what they're doing, what they're telling you, and such. But the other issue I end up with having with perception is they get called too early. Like, there should be a point where, and I don't know if it's because DMs are not explaining things well enough, or it's the way the questions are being asked, but I've seen perception checks be called for things that really honestly should have been obvious to the player, to the character. Things that they shouldn't need to proceed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It should be looking for the things that are different or wrong or off a bit or something unusual even, versus, seeing general description of what's there.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. And the time that's come up a lot. Like, something large jumps out in front of you, make a perception check to see if you notice it. I mean, that can be ludicrous. But you mentioned insight and perception, for example, being used to try to determine motive. And I agree, that doesn't make sense. But you can see how that, if you're looking at the Pathfinder 1E skill set, you can see how that happens, because there is no insight. There is nothing like that in the PF 1E system. So, in this case, you could use, and I have often done this, I'll use a check against an ability score, which is more of a 5E's kind of return to that, which was a thing that you did a lot in 1E, 2E, where I might do a wisdom check to see if someone can determine intent or in some way gain insight, but you don't have that in the core Pathfinder. Now, interestingly,
interesting.
Go ahead.
Actually, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was looking at perception. I actually clicked on the thing to get a better description of it, and not only is insight missing from the Pathfinder skill, I guess maybe diplomacy. Have to look at what diplomacy gives you.
Diplomacy is used to skill to persuade others. It is, it's for conflict negotiation. I suppose you could use it, to determine that persuasion requires listening, which might not be a bad way to do it. But yeah, go ahead.
But the weird thing is, in terms of the Pathfinder skills for PF1, not only is insight missing, not there yet. I mean, I can't say it wasn't put in yet, but it isn't even of the portions of perception that they have, in terms of like modifiers and such. It doesn't mention anything other than being able to hear a conversation, not being able to tell anything about the conversation.
No, absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Now here's
missing.
Agreed. Now, Mike, Necromantic DM, you put something in the chat, Mike. That would sound okay, but remember, diplomacy is charisma based. So the ability to have insight into what someone is saying really would not be driven by charisma. Now, your ability to persuade could be driven by charisma, but your ability to interpret or to discern, to have a level of insight into what someone is doing or saying or their motivations, that would be more either an intelligence or a wisdom based modifier, not a charisma, I would think. So coming back to Richard's point here, I see wisdom as the which comes back to using wisdom, not charisma, and doing an ability check. Now, here's the problem with wisdom as a core for perception. In the way that Robert is discussing it, does make sense that, hey, thank you very much, Retro Gamer. Man, good to see you again. How have you been, Mike? It's been a minute. 26 months of consecutive subs. Thank you very much for that. So if wisdom is, as you say, useful to perception because you have this breadth of experience or insight that you've gained over time to give you a situational sort of a corollary knowledge, that really, again, to me, comes back more to an insight that I have based on my wisdom. If I look at the perception in the sense of, I'm wandering through a forest and it's darkened and I see something moving in the periphery of my vision, that's got nothing to do with wisdom. The keenness of my hearing, the footfalls in the distance, has nothing to do with my wisdom. And the example that we talked about, Rob, would be I can have a scholar in his 90s, and he might have an 18 wisdom, and he has the learning and knowledge of a lifetime, but his eyes are occluded by cataracts, his ears are partially deaf, and he on a battlefield by the base rule set is going to be better able to spot an enemy in the bushes than my, 18-year-old first-level fighter, with keen, alert reflexes, keen, sharp eyes, and good hearing. That makes no sense.
No, agreed. It's one of those things that I remember, with the, I don't know if people still do it anymore. I haven't. It's been a minute since I've had characters have to worry about aging to that extent.
Right.
But back in the original first edition at least, they had I think it was like your intelligence and wisdom went up as you aged, and your physical stats went down as you age because you get just physically weaker at a certain point. And it just kind of like, well, now that you bring wisdom into it, having skills based specifically off of it becomes problematic.
Yeah, right, Rob. And we need to think not just about the PCs who, maybe you have a PC that you've made that's 65 years old. Typically, people start younger. But what about your NPCs? What about your enemies? Should they have the ability, so the point that Richard makes here, which I take on really well, tethering the ability to detect wisdom, or to detect enemies to wisdom was a bit of a kludge 20 years ago. It worked for some high wisdom characters, I guess, but I'm not troubled by monks or druids being good spotters. And I agree with that. Monks, druids, that makes sense. And this is going to blow your mind when we look at some of the old school stuff. But why should clerics be good spotters? That doesn't make any sense. And why should plain old fighters or rogues, the guys who are supposedly ready for sudden violence at any moment, be worse at seeing and detecting spotting those things than a cleric would be? That is just, it's nonsensical. So
I think that's why they went with having the proficiency in it. And even doubling up on the proficiency is to fix that imbalance that comes with not having the base stat be good.
No, exactly. And I think Baptized and Plus, that's a good question. I think you definitely should, it is Monster of the Week rules to combine different stats with skill checks so you can do something like wisdom or perception. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what, ultimately this can be solved by a DM. A DM can modify things to the situation. So as Baptized and Plus said, if if I'm doing a perception check to scent the hint of orc flesh somewhere in the woods, but I'm also stuffed up and sick, or I've just been hit with some sort of allergy, then I'm going to take a serious penalty to that. That just makes sense. Or, if I've had a flash of light and I'm partially blinded for a period of time, my visual perception is going to take a hit. But we're just talking about the core here. So here's Richard's suggestion on how to handle it, and then we're going to branch off and talk about some of the other systems and the old Dragon magazine ideas. So he says there isn't any other ability score that should be linked to perception that makes more sense, and I agree with that. Intelligence, maybe, but why would wizards be better at seeing things than sorcerers, right? They're both intelligence-based, wizards are intelligence-based, sorcerers are charisma-based. They're both spellcasters. Why is a wizard necessarily more innately able to see or spot things than a sorcerer? So that doesn't make sense either. And so you can make a good argument that perception ought to be its own ability score. In fact, there are plenty of game systems where it is. But I think D&D has another answer for this question. All right, so before we get to that, look at this note here. You can make a good argument that perception ought to be its own, not feat. He didn't say feat. He didn't say skill. I missed this the first time I read it. He said ability score. Well, Robert, check this out.
I'm going to take a little issue. I mean, because his thing about the wizard, going with intelligence instead of talking about wizards versus sorcerers. Well, I mean, your problem may be the fact that sorcerers, the question is it the fact that they may not have great intelligence, or is it should charisma or whatever it is really be their main go-to stat?
Well, I kind of, so that's a whole other discussion, and I actually kind of like it because
it kind of muddles the issue there.
But I think that's where we're muddling it, Rob. And so I think what for you and I, because we'll find plenty of good things to argue about. I don't think this is one of them. I think for us to not conflate let's separate the types of things that are being perceived. And for right now, let's focus specifically on visual, auditory, or sensory perception of things, not insights into things, not wisdom or connecting dots about things, but specifically, how far can I see? How clearly can I hear? How attuned is my sense of smell? How easily can I see something in the shadows? How likely am I to notice, a crack somewhere with the visual acuity that I have? So,
actually, it occurs to me before we even get to that. It occurs to me that I just realized what the other problem I have with how perception normally gets handled is normally if DM calls for a perception roll for multiple players, they'll give it to whoever passes the roll. They'll give they'll tell them what they see. The one thing I've noticed is that everybody notices the exact same things, which is something
yes.
I've run Castles and Crusades, and I'll call for checks, but I'm not giving that. They're not all getting the same. They can all pass if I call for a wisdom check or some kind of check. That doesn't mean they're all getting the same information.
Yeah.
If one of them, I've got those who have hear something. There may be a listen that they're better at. Some may have the sense of smell. Half-orcs in Castles and Crusades have an improved sense of smell. What I've noticed that if you get a DM who calls for a perception check and multiple people pass, I can't remember the last time I had a DM give different details to the different players when all of them when a bunch of them pass at the same time.
I like that, Rob. That's a really good point. And honestly, I think I make that same mistake. Now, usually the reason for that is, as a DM, I'm thinking, do they notice there's something hiding in the corner or not, right? And then but I like what you're suggesting there. If I have multiple people succeed, and perhaps by the variance of they succeed, I could give different bits of information to each person, or maybe different levels of detail. I think that's a very good point. So we're looking here at Dragon Magazine. This is number 133 from 1988. And, I love looking at these things. So much fun stuff in here. All the old Gazetteer. You still had Gary Gygax's articles in here. We're going to skip down to page 16, I believe is the correct place. And it was the article that you saw I had up a moment ago, which is Notice Anything Different. So we're going before perception existed. In fact, this article written by Thomas Ruddick, look at this quote here. So here's this, so the scenario here is, so if you look up here, the player's handbook contains rules for elves and dwarves for discovering secret doors or pits, or for thieves for detecting traps, but it has nothing which applies in general to situations in which characters might or might not notice something. And there's a little example here of, do they notice things inside this example that he gives. And so he says here, each DM, let me make this a little bigger so people can read it for themselves as well online. Each DM seems to have a slightly different method for dealing with this sort of thing. Some roll a die and let players roll higher to see whether or not a discovery is made, or others would simply require the players to roll higher to acquire more information. Some suggest the players make an ability check as described in the Dungeoneer Survival Guide. Still others never design such ambiguous situations so they don't run into it. But none of them, these solutions seemed to Mr. Ruddick to be satisfactory. So then he says up here, let me scroll up just a bit, his own solution. Now, remember what Richard Baker said. His own solution was to create an 8th ability score, perception. Now, for all of our old school, no, exactly, Jay. So for all of our old school folks, we may have a lot of people that are on here confused going, what do you mean 8th? What was the 7th? I have strength, intelligence, wisdom, constitution, dexterity, and charisma. What's the 7th? Put it in the chat. There you go, Steve. It is comeliness, right? So comeliness, which I love and use. And then so Mr. Ruddick was suggesting perception as an 8th ability. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're going to do that here at Blue Box, but I thought it was really fun to note. I don't even think Richard realized this when he wrote this quote here, that this existed already, but there is an entire system built out in Dragon Magazine 133 that advocates for making perception an additional ability score like strength, intelligence, wisdom at all. And he's got bonuses here that were built out. I'll show you here. So how to generate the scores, and then here's how it's used in play. So for example, if you had an ability score of 3, you had serious perceptual impairment. You had minimum scores for things like rangers or ninjas. So this idea that it was class specific, yeah, I could say rangers should be really good in certain situations at perception and spotting. Certainly thieves, assassins, barbarians, depending on the scenario, could be really skilled at perception in that sense of the actual visual auditory acuity. And so here's a list of classes that the author of this article recommended, some of the ones that we just discussed. So, again, I'm not suggesting this is what I want to go to, but I do think it was a really fun way to look at it. And we're going to look at some other things in that Dragon magazine. Rob, comments on that?
Oh man, yeah, that's what the game needs is more stats. I no.
Well. Now remember, the game started. We had this, right? We had an incredible number of non-weapon proficiencies. Now, interestingly, when you went to 5e, and I didn't really realize, or actually, Pathfinder 2e. Let's go to Pathfinder 2e. Pathfinder 2e is down to 17 skills. So they have really cut it down. So even something like thievery, which you used to have in the old days, you had hide in shadows, pick locks, move silently, climb walls. The thief had numerous percentile-based abilities. That's all boiled down to thievery in the new system. And I have reasons I don't like this, but they have definitely simplified it. So you feel like too much already, don't add anything.
Well, and yeah, I mean, and there's also the problem, and Mike actually just pointed it out. This was suggested in 1E because I noticed that the Oriental Ventures stuff is still in there, and I mentioned the Thief Acrobat. You already had a number of classes that had multiple minimum levels for stats. You'd be adding another one that some of the classes would have to have, and you mentioned a ranger, because what would the ranger need to have, a 15 on that chart or 14?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
makes it harder and harder. Yeah, I agree. So
your ranger character is the kind of character that the DM would be looking at you sideways and say, you really rolled that, huh?
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, or you just keep rolling and rolling and rolling until you get that, in which case you've really removed the randomness anyway, because eventually, what's the, give 1,000 monkeys infinity and they'll write the works of Shakespeare. Eventually you're gonna get the skill sets that you need if you roll enough times, but that kind of defeats the whole purpose of the randomness. I do love comeliness. No, comeliness is not limited in use. I use comeliness all the time, Mike. Robert loathes comeliness.
I see no purpose to that stat whatsoever.
But it's so active in social and interpersonal situations, isn't it? That's what the use for it is. Oh yeah, it is. If you don't think there is a difference, if people do in all kinds of situations respond differently. I'll give you an example. And this is, I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's real. If you look at some of the biggest streamers on Twitch, what's the one, the hot tub, Amaranth, whatever, you're going to find a host of people with high comeliness, not necessarily high charisma, and they are attracting a tremendous number of followers and viewers because specifically of that comeliness. It is a reality of the human condition. That's why I think it makes sense. But we're off topic.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's real.
I'm just like, it's one of those things that I don't care. You want to say somebody is absolutely stunning, whatever, and not have a high charisma. Fine, yeah. I don't need a stat for that.
Well, but you kind of do. I mean, like, otherwise everyone is walking around, if they desire it, with a stunningly handsome or beautiful. And I know obviously some people role play differently, but let's Amanda, if you're in the chat, can you pop up a poll? Love or hate comeliness? Not your own personal comeliness. The idea of that as a stat in D&D. It was introduced. It was kind of in the Dragon magazine stuff. It was not in the original 1E, but it was introduced
Unearthed
later.
Arcana.
Well, Unearthed Arcana was the amalgamation of several Dragon magazine articles. So you had comeliness in a Dragon mag, and then it was sort of canonized in Unearthed Arcana. Thank you, Mad Chatters. Okay, so great question, Brew. So maybe we need to do a whole other LMA on this, but this is just sort of off the cuff. My charisma is typically defined as a sense of your personal magnetism, your ability to persuade, to command a room, to create a sense of that magnetism. So it's the orator has a great charisma, the person who can walk into a room and suddenly sort of captures everyone with the energy or their persuasiveness, the person who in small talk makes you feel important. And it would be, I'll just use some examples. I'm not expressing political preference here at all, but for example, Bill Clinton, he was famous for, if he was in a room and he talked to you, you felt like you were the only person. Everyone who's talked to, they would say he felt like you were the only person in the room, and there was this sense of magnetism and importance. That is kind of a high-level definition of charisma. Now, when you extend it to things like the sorcerer class, it has also kind of been either woven, if you want to look at it positively, or conflated, if you want to look at it negatively, with a sense of personal will. That sometimes charisma was a force of your will, a force of your nature, that some of these great orators were so powerful and persuaded in their belief. Or take, for example, Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, he was often referred to as having do you know what they said he had, Rob? It was a certain field. That ring a bell? They said at Apple that Steve Jobs had what they coined a reality distortion field. That you could get into a meeting with Steve, and he was so compelling in his argumentation, his will, his narrative, that you believed, even if it didn't make any sense, it was a reality distortion field. So, Bruhoff, that's kind of how you typically define charisma. Comeliness, let me just finish answering this question. Comeliness separates the physical appearance from the power of will or charisma. So let's take, for example, someone like Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, highly charismatic, a powerful orator, not a very visually attractive person. So comeliness then is a way to measure how someone's physical appearance comes across to the broader, and I realize this is cultural and many other things, but to the broader world, are you looked at as someone who is attractive? So you might take someone, like who's an example of it? Let's take a male example of someone who is, visually very handsome, but maybe not, all that charismatic. Probably you can take a lot of Hollywood actors, a lot of models, they might look fantastic, but they're not compelling orators. They're not persuasive. They're not. So that, Bruhoff, is kind of how you separate. Alec Baldwin, yeah, good example. Although Alec is looking pretty rough these days. A young Alec Baldwin, yes. Rob, go ahead.
So here's where I run into an issue with comeliness, and besides the fact that I just don't think it's necessary, it's the kind of thing where, as far as like personal, as personal preferences goes, what's your type? What in terms of what do you find most attractive? Like, I could say there's a number of people that I could say they're objectively attractive, relative to for my purposes. I wouldn't put them at an 18. Somebody else might put them at a 20. Super. Oh my God, goddess level beauty, whatever. I'm like, they're attractive. They're not my type. So who gets the 18 comeliness? I think it's not going to affect, and it's not even like a broader audience, because if you're not attracted to that physical type, I don't care. They're not going to have the same effect on you as it's going to have on everyone else. Comeliness is very, very subjective.
Well, no, I don't. Whoa. Comeliness is not very. Wait, no, Rob. Comeliness is. I can't let you get away with that. You cannot say comeliness is very, very subjective. You can say it's subjective.
At the high end, yeah. As soon as you start getting at the high end, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I don't know what you mean by the high end.
When you're talking about an 18 comeliness, okay. Your idea of as far as like looking at attractive women. you and I can have a very different idea of who has the 18 comeliness and who doesn't. When I say 18 comeliness, I'm not just saying that they're beautiful. I'm saying that I am an absolute freaking awe. I would be an absolute freaking awe of that woman if she was standing right in front of me.
Well, I don't even want to make this gender based because I think this, I'm not.
But here's, it could go the other direction.
We're going to get back to talking about perception in a minute, but the point here that's being made is there are actual, like, some of this is subjective for sure. Some people prefer people with red hair. Some people like blondes. Some people like brunettes. Some people like men that are tall. Some people like men that are stocky. Some people like ladies. There are all kinds. I'm not saying that there is one maxim for beauty. I think Manda, I like her comment. Come on. We all know when someone is physically beautiful. Attractiveness is a blend of charisma, comeliness. I agree with that. So attractiveness would be a blend of comeliness and charisma. Someone could be plastic beautiful, but have an obnoxious personality and be extremely unattractive. Don't read Tim's comment. And then I think Amanda said something a moment ago about, if you're a hag and you're trying to seduce someone, the idea is, like, there is scientific social experimentation done. Something as simple as symmetry. Symmetry is viewed as attractive across all societies and across all cultures. Facial symmetry, right? So we can say that while it is subjective, I don't even want to name a person, but take, whoever considered some of the top models or most attractive actresses or actors in society today, and you will get a broad swath of agreement, not universal. I love this in Scott Lynch's The Gentleman Bastard series. If you haven't read those books, they're really, really good. In it, the character Locke Lamora, for very specific reasons, actually relating to his backstory that you don't find out till much later, is absolutely obsessed with a redhead, and it's the red hair it's got to do. It's a very good sort of story as to why. So for him, beautiful women with other colors of hair, they don't attract him. And Rob, I'm not taking away your sense of agency or anyone else's for preference, but this idea that you can have certain socially generally agreed upon perceptions of what is or isn't considered attractive can be fairly normalized.
But once you make it a game stat, that changes it, because then it has to be, an 18 comeliness has to affect you regardless, and you are taking away, if the character, it's like it becomes one size fits all. Once you're an 18 comeliness in game, it doesn't matter what the character's preferences are, because 18 comeliness, it's an 18 comeliness.
I don't think that's true, because you could say the same thing about charisma. I could say if someone has an 18 charisma, I'm suddenly bending to their will with whatever they say. No, that's not true. I can meet someone and I can meet let's say I meet a man, and he's Brad Pitt at 25 years old or whatever, by most social standards considered to be a very attractive man. I can meet him, women can meet him. That doesn't mean that they are suddenly bending to his will or that he is attractive to all women, but just that he has a general socially accepted attractiveness. We're so far afield here. It sounds to me like this needs to be a whole other LMA. And Rob, I love your passion about it. I think you're ready to fight me, and that's good. Okay.
It's one of the things it was one of the things I just never saw the point to. I mean, I don't remember ever using comeliness, even when in the 1E days when Unearthed Arcana came out. I don't ever remember making any role ever having to do with comeliness. So, what's it there for?
It's for role play. And yeah, the question was in the chat. I love that. What skill checks would be used for comeliness? Probably none. But it is used for role play, and I have used it often for role play. And it can go both ways. If I have I had a character in one of my campaigns. He was a dwarf. He had a low charisma, and he had a miserable comeliness. And I think he had a scar and one eye. And there was a reaction that people would have to him when he walked in, just based on his physical appearance. And that was part of the role play. And it can be the opposite. If you have this character who is statuesque, symmetrical, has all the characteristics of beauty, when they walk in, that will be something that can be role played, and that's up to the DM.
But here's the thing, though. Why do you assume that everyone's going to want to play the beautiful? If it's
I didn't. I just said that. I didn't say everyone.
Yeah, but exactly. So then, why do you need it as a stat? If you just
because the same reason I need anything else as a stat. It's just a measurement of the character. It's like their strength, like your physical appearance is every bit as much a measurement of you as the speed of your dexterity, as an example. It just
if it's not going to have an in-game.
I just said it has in-game.
Actual in-game mechanics. Impact.
Wait, so it has to have mechanics? It can't be roleplay?
No. I mean, roleplay. You can roleplay whatever you want. If you want to roleplay as physically unattractive, physically attractive, I leave that up to you, because it's if it's not going to have a mechanics stat, if there's not going to be a mechanics endpoint to it, it's an empty stat there for no other reason than to have a number. It isn't needed.
I disagree with you completely, but that's okay. We do that a lot on this show, and yes, it is. As Jay points, it's a reference point. But Dark Elf, you can't just role play a beautiful person. I don't think that makes sense either. I think it should be any more that I can just role play a strong person, or I can just role play. I can pretend I'm strong, I guess, but the reality of
strong has an in-game mechanics cost to it.
But whether it did or didn't, I would still have it. And I think comeliness, I can even see situations where I might put an in-game mechanic in it if I have two individuals.
In that case, you're arguing hypothetical with regards to strength, because it's not hypothetical. It's there. I mean.
Well, no, I know, but comeliness is there on my character sheets too. It's neither hypothetical in that situation. So we're Rob. I'm gonna kill this conversation, because this needs to be another LMA. I'm enjoying this. I want to do this again with you, and people like it when we fight. So we'll come back to this. Yes, back to yes.
Write it down.
Manda just said, "Okay, boys, back to your corners." Okay, back to perception with the 15-20 minutes. Yes, I think that's exactly right, Jay. That's how I play it as well. And not everyone wants to have a beautiful character. There is something. So let's go back. I love this example, Locke Lamora, in the Scott Lynch series. He is described as a very plain-looking individual, and in fact, much like the kind of person that you would overlook: average height, brown hair, average sort of build, which is perfect for a thief. Especially one that does a lot of the con games. He's not the kind of person you're going to remember in a crowd. If I'm building someone I want to be a great thief, I probably want him to be someone that doesn't stand out in a crowd, someone that isn't that similarly, if I want to play a super intimidating barbarian, I probably want him to look a little gnarly, and I don't need him walking in looking like Brad Pitt. That's probably so. Not everyone wants to play a beautiful character. All right.
By the way, John.
Yes.
John, the chat is perceived that you have not gotten back to the original topic.
Well, I had to make sure I had the last word, Rob. Okay. All right. Back to perception. All right. So Richard's suggestion, or not suggestion, but his kind of musing was making it a stat, but that's not what he proposed. He said it should be a class feature like hit dice. So he said, I asked myself who should be good at noticing sneaky enemies. The answers he came up with were strong class-based, like barbarian, rangers, rogues should be top of the list. Clerics and wizards, probably not so much. Character class already tests for basic fighting skills and resilience, so adding combat awareness to that makes sense. So he suggested trying something like this. Perception is not a wisdom check. Instead, it's a class perception bonus to checks to perceive things. To keep perception on the same scale as other checks in the game, including enemy stealth checks, make sure your class perception covers the same range of ability modifiers 0 to 5. All characters are proficient in perception, but the proficiency bonus increases as you level up, after all, and experience probably is the best way to learn how to notice danger approaching. So that's kind of the point you were making earlier, Rob. And so he gives an example here of a chart, and he says, in some ways, holla, it's a throwback to some of the surprise rules for first edition. Everybody remember you had surprise on 2 of 6, but if you were a ranger, you could only be surprised on 1 of 6. It was a class-specific ability for perception. And so here, are the suggestions he makes by class. So he's got, like, for example, paladins and clerics don't have any, sorcerers don't have any, wizards don't have any base perception bonus. And again, this is not insight in its truest forms. He's fixing 5e. One of the things that 5e has right that 3.5 has wrong is it, in my opinion, is it has investigation as an example, which you don't have in 3.5 and 3. So everything being stacked into perception, that's when we start trying to add all these other elements to it. This is just looking at the core sort of sensory perception, noticing, smelling, hearing, and he's got these here. And then also having a bonus by race. So elves, I agree, elves should have a natural bonus to perception. They're known to have super keen ears in most settings. They're supposed to have longer visual sight and acuity. And maybe you modify this by location. Maybe dwarves in subterranean scenarios have a perception bonus. And then also add it as a feat. So the feat could add +2. So this is kind of a very simple fix that moves perception away from... and what I don't like about it the way it's now, it also consumes all the skills. So you look at, if you look at everybody in GHA or in Rise of the Rune Lords, they all had their perception skills so high because it was used so often in game, and that's to the decrement of other skills which could be more fun to role play in game. So I'm going to pause there. Amanda, if you would put up in the chat, what do you think of Richard Baker's suggestion as a way to fix perception? Like it, hate it, or I have a better idea. Rob, what are your thoughts?
I mean, it kind of goes back to the 2E idea where, but maybe a bit simplified in terms of not being, 20 different things.
Right.
But yeah, it's, I think the problem I run into is perception ends up being kind of a catch-all. They went from 2E having this massive number of non-proficiency skills, which, I mean, let's be frank, it was kind of unwieldy, especially since you ended up having all these splat books for the different classes and such that added more and more to it. To trying to tighten it together, the problem is you get to a point where you're trying to figure out what you can get rid of extraneously, and you end up with things that probably have a wider impact than they should, and perception is possibly, and I say just because it gets used so often, but it is probably, guilty number one, or, issue number one.
I agree with that, and I think that's where 5e and even 4, the perception or investigates. Here's the 4E skills. You really first saw, if you look at how they did it here, you have insight. Insight was sense motive previously, and that was baked into 4E as separate from perception. So I know Grendelwolf is saying, hey, like, roll over roll, don't stop up the drain. I would be surprised if anyone who watches my streams thinks that we're too stat heavy or too roll heavy. I don't think we're bogging down. And if anyone disagrees, maybe I should do another poll, but I think we keep the rule set pretty behind the scenes and don't make it overly cumbersome. I think that you have better systems, even in 5e right now, than what you have in 3.5. If you don't want to do that, go back to the 1E, 2E, and just do all ability checks. So insight is just a wisdom check. Investigation would be related maybe to wisdom, intelligence, and or perception if you had that as a skill. There's still time to vote. So far, we have the most votes for liking this fix. Only 3 said nah, and 4 say they have a better idea. So we'll get the better ideas popped in the chat as well. But if you haven't voted, let me know what your thoughts are. Is that only perception? Good. What's the question you're asking there, Grendelwolf? I'm not sure I understand. The events where these are needed can be done faster and easier with in-game quickness. I don't understand what you mean by that. Yeah, exactly, Amanda. So if you have a better idea, please post that in our chat. I think we're going to make a change. I do not like the way perception currently runs in my game, and we have just a few minutes left here, and I had a couple other things I want to cover. Rob, what are your further thoughts on this?
You know, I have to laugh because the way I got away from this is not running a game that has perception. But
Yeah. So what? So what? So then, how do you handle it? Like in your game, how do you do it?
So at CNC, because everything is attribute based, it gives me a lot more freedom to decide what a given class is going to use. Sometimes it'll come down to skills that they have for their given class, but Castle and Crusades, they don't hand out like a whole bunch of them. There's some have more than others, but I can use any attribute that I think may be applicable, and then tie what success looks like to that attribute for that character.
No, I agree. Now, one of the challenges, though, with tying to attributes, as I see it, is that attributes are static, more or less. Whereas feats and skills are things which do get better as you go. My wisdom is not likely to go up unless you're playing like PF1E and you have it like going up by 1 point every 4 levels, which I don't do, or you find a tome which has a permanent ability increase.
Well, with Castles and Crusades, unless it's a named skill that belongs to a given class, you're going to get better every level anyway because you add your level to your die roll for Castles and Crusades.
All right, but then a level, so that's making no accommodation for class. So then you're adding an accommodation for class in on your own?
Well, a class, if it's a class skill, like say,
which there is no percent. You don't have percent. So let's take the example of a ninja. Okay, ninja. Yeah. All right, you have the new Codex, Codex Sinarium, coming out, which is going to have a whole host of classes in CNC, which are going to be based on sort of Eastern mythos. A ninja would be a class which ideally has trained rigorously for a lifetime to be highly attuned and perceptive to environment beyond just whatever base ability score might be or beyond what level. Because if it's ability score and level, then the cleric is going to have the same if they have the same ability score and level as the ninja.
So I mean it's hard to without having the actual text. I can tell you, like say for a ranger has a tracking skill or the ability to track, and any player in any class in CNC can attempt to track.
But would a ranger? So forget tracking.
Wait.
Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please go ahead.
Here's what it comes down to. But because that skill, and because that skill belongs to a particular class, anyone rolling for it that is not a member of that class does not add their level. So as the levels go higher, the ranger is going to get better and better at it. The other players, unless their ability scores change for some reason, is going to stay level.
Yeah, I know. So we've talked about that before, and I've seen how that works. I actually like that. But if I understood you a moment ago, you said you don't use perception in your game. And
yeah, because it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist as a.
So I'm asking. So the question I'm asking you then is, how do you handle those situations in game? Forget tracking. I'm not talking about tracking. Let's say I'm walking through a forest, and I'm looking for a yellow finch. Does the ranger not have a higher likelihood of seeing that in the tree because you just said I don't have a class skill based on that? So what? It's not tracking. So how does the ranger have a better chance to see it than the cleric?
It's not necessarily actually, it's not even necessarily the ranger. It could be.
No, in this case, I'm saying in my hypothetical is a ranger.
Yeah.
In my hypothetical, does the ranger in the forest not have a better chance to spot that in a tree than a cleric? In your game,
I'd have to look at the skills to see what they have, because for tracking, if you're looking for a particular bird. Here's the thing: a ranger is going to have a better idea of where the bird would be. The ranger would have a better idea of the trees the bird may be found in. So I would give a bonus to the ranger just because of the fact that they know their understanding of the bird is going to give them. They're going to be looking in the right. Essentially, they're going to be looking in the right place first.
Wonders if John is working on an avian-based book. No, I agree. But then, so what you're really saying, Rob, is that absent, and I'm not trying to pin you down on this. I'm really curious as to how you're handling it in your game, because I don't like how I'm handling it. That's my whole point here, and I think I need to fix this. Yes, Amanda, definitely everyone that has an either idea, please put that in our chat. the more I think through this, I really wasn't originally thinking I was going to go with this system, but the more I think through it, I really see myself doing two things. I'm going to modify the skill trees from the base PF1E that I'm using, and I'm going to add something like either an investigate or a search or type skill. I think that should be separate from general perception, and I think general perception can be adapted to something like this or whatever better ideas people have in the chat. But I love your points, Rob, about the way it's used improperly in so many games. I love the idea of, and I'm just looking here at some of the, this is Pathfinder 2E. Pathfinder 2E has gone to these 17 that I mentioned earlier. This actually is a good question, Rob. You've played some PF2E. How is this handled in PF2E when you don't have perception as a skill? How is it done?
Actually, in PF2E, perception is a skill.
So I've looked in 3 different places, and they said they had narrowed down to these 17, so I must be looking at the wrong thing. So it's still a skill in PF2E based on wisdom? Is that how it's done?
I think it's based on wisdom.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right, Amanda, has anybody already posted an idea in the chat that I missed? Yes, we know the airspeed of a velocity airspeed velocity of a swallow, just all depending on whether it's laden or unladen. The airspeed of a finch, I think, is somewhat more suspect. Yes, surprise is perception based on class. Exactly, Tim. We noted that earlier. It's all okay. So let me look in the Discord here if people have popped it in there real quick. And let's see what we have. And I don't... Am I missing it? Oh, there it is. All right, here we go. All right, so we have... Twilight Insanity said, I think perception should be a stat rather than a class bonus. So you're agreeing sort of with the old school Dragon Magazine 133, or what Richard's other perception was, point was of perception, that you could actually see it being a separate stat. Interesting. Pat's typing something as well. While we get the rest of those, let me show just a little bit more fun. And by the way, if anyone's watching us for the first time, please don't think Rob and I hate each other. Well, I don't know. He might hate me. I'm not sure. But I don't hate Rob. I love Rob. We have fun arguments and conversations, and it's, we trust each other. And that's why I refer to him. We have the ever mysterious Tim, and we have the ever mistaken Rob. But as I pull up now the Dragon magazine, some fun stuff. I always like to look at these old Dragon magazines. There was something on page 48. Let me see where I'm at here. Oh, look at the Star Wars role-playing game. So fun. Okay, I gotta get this. So here, a little quicker. Got a bunch of ancient Roman deities in this one as well. Middle Earth, MERP. We talk about that a lot. Always love these roll of computers. Back at a time when computers were considered to be a novelty in role-playing, and these old screenshots, the quarterstaff.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't this
Apple Mac?
Apple Mac, I know, exactly. All the old school stuff.
I'm thinking back to that first Super Bowl commercial for the Mac.
Yes. So Datarol said a lot of the perception discrepancies for Rangers were fixed with the natural explorer preferred terrain feature. Yes, I agree. And look, this comes down to how much is it a game or is it a simulation? And the point that was being made earlier, like in the chat, you don't want to overburden your game. If you're trying to be hyper realistic to every scenario, every situation, that's the beauty of CNC as an example. Everything is kind of on the fly, based off abilities with a lot of DM adjudication. There are some disadvantages to that when taken to the extreme, but I think it's a really cool way to do it. The other thing that I wanted is, here's some more of these screenshots. The Elven Gourd, the Rapier, the Short Bow. So fun. Now let's go to the end of this magazine. I believe it was page 98, or it was 88. I wanted to show, let me go, just going off of memory here. Nope, not 88. Must have been 98. Oh yeah, all the cons. So many cons back then. The Gen Con 88 festival. So here you have all the fun. You remember these? The Dragon Mirth would be at the back of the Dragon magazines. I like this one here on the right. Kisses, one gold piece. Business is slow. And you've got the succubi, and all that there. And then I like this one. You are right, Newt. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. And all you see is Newt's leg sticking out from underneath the dragon. And then how about this one? Play Dragon. Instead of Playboy, and he's got pictures of his pinup tied up princesses on the wall. Fun stuff. And then of course at the very end, I like the back cover of this. Launching, the future is here. This brand new world, the Forgotten Realms. So exciting! We're launching this brand new Forgotten Realms lore and world. Hawaiian giant step for dragonkind. So just really fun stuff in these old dragon mags. All right, so I think this has been a fun conversation. If you have some ideas, you still have that book. Very cool, that guy Baldrax. If you've watched the stream tonight, and I think we got mostly home folks here, but if you watch the stream tonight and you haven't followed, or if you're a follower and you haven't subbed, or if you're a sub whose sub is expired, let it not be so. We have one question for you tonight. What are you doing? Come on, give us a follow, give us a sub here at Blue Box. We're going to raid into Jay here in just a moment, but I want to say thank you, as always, to my esteemed co-host, Robert. It was great fun arguing with you tonight and talking with you. I'm going to review the content in the Discord and any other commentary. I'm going to muse upon this. I will consult the sages, and we'll announce, it'll be something that'll be pretty transparent to you as viewers. But I'm going to make some mechanics tweaks that just make the game a little, I think, less unbalanced toward perception being this catch-all bucket of gobbledygook that really doesn't reflect the appropriate way to do it in the game, even if I just go to simple things like insight being a wisdom check, which to me does make sense. Rob, I'm going to give you the last word.
So yeah, I mean, again, the one of the things I highly recommend is don't necessarily have all your players see and notice the same things off the top of the bat. Play to their classes, play to their, play to whatever race they're playing. Elves and dwarves may notice different things. Some of the, in some rule sets, this is codified as far as stuff that they're supposed to see, but and then go from there. Don't necessarily, make it okay. Well, you're gonna need a perception check. I mean, some classes probably should know certain things without needing a perception check.
Agreed. Well said. And oh, by the way, I guess real quick before we go, for those that have hung around to the end before we raid, check this out. So this will launch soon. The Blue Box website is finally going to go live here soon. And thank you so much to Tom Vantelord, who is super active in our Discord and also is part of Rory's games every other Sunday. And we're building this out. So currently it's got our core values and our founding. You'll be able to see all of our campaigns here. So we'll have Tears of Air, Greyhawk Awakening, Fall of Red Dawn. So you'll see each of these. We have galleries. You can see the cast and characters. So we're building all that out. So here, you can see this is a lot of the old school GHA Book 1 stuff, but we're going to build this out with all the new characters. You can see our schedule as well, just like you can on Twitch. So you have this week on Blue Box plugged in as a Google Calendar. You can see what streams are going this week and what times. And then we're going to have a merch store up, which is something I've resisted, but we do get this request a lot. So as much as I try to do this by giveaways for people that really want stuff, we'll give them that opportunity. We have the fan art galleries that we're building out, and we'll have all kinds of different fan art here. From all of our folks. This is in different places in Discord. Here you're going to be able to get it all on the website and keep up with things. And then it's got just the general About Us page where you can see, you can see our core purpose and core values here, our founding, what we're all about. It's got links to all of our different social media locations, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, so on and so forth, and contact us. And then lastly, we haven't built this fully out yet, but we'll have a page for each of our sponsors where you can see them here. So right now, if you go to blueboxrpg.com, this is what you'll see. So we don't have the site live yet, but you have an under construction page, and that will go live here in the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much to Tom Vantelord, who's helping us with all that. Okay, so We're going to raid into Jay now. Reminder, we will be back with Tears of Aird at 1:30 on Sunday. That campaign has been so much fun. The players are absolutely fantastic. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, please join us Sunday at 1:30. You're really going to like that campaign. And we left it, the urchins, the understreet rats on the streets of Altamira in the world of Aird, are attempting to raid the second home of Klaus von Papen in search of an item that is very important to their new benefactor, Glottimus, the king of the Gogs, the Guild of Gentle Supplication. So join us at 1:30 on Sunday, and we're going to raid into Jay now. Thank you again to Rob. Thank you to everybody else. Good night.